My name is Fiona Calloway, and I'm 36 years old. 9 minutes after my divorce was finalized, I called my father and said, "Then fire the 27 relatives of my ex-husband who work at your company." I waited 15 months for this decision, and I paid the price as I describe it. My father remained silent online. Then she asked me the last question she was going to ask me. I thought the call would be the hardest part of the day. I was wrong. That same night, my ex-mother-in-law stood at my apartment door and screamed so loudly that everyone on my floor could hear her. Then, when the screaming didn't work, she lowered her voice and gave me something far more dangerous than her anger. But here's what everyone doesn't know. I've found the empty shelf. Welcome to a series of quiet dramas where family secrets are revealed and quiet resilience triumphs. We tell the stories of people who stopped waiting for peace and started waiting for their dignity. If these stories resonate with you, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. It will take you to places you never expected. Without my father, none of this would have made sense, so I'll leave it at that. Because without my father, none of this would have made sense. Raymond Calloway founded Calloway Mechanical in 1992 with a used welding machine and a truck in dire need of repair. When I was in high school, the company had an actual building in Grove City, Ohio, and the whole place smelled like a mixture of mold and burnt coffee. I grew up doing my homework in the break room. I learned to read contracts before I learned to drive, mostly because my father signed anything someone presented to him, and a family member had to see his fingerprints. That person became my job. I went to law school after graduating from the honors program and worked night shifts at a brokerage firm. I didn't receive a single penny from the company. Perhaps that meant too much to me. Eventually, when I became general counsel and compliance officer, I earned the badge. It's like owning the welders. In 2026, we had 212 employees and 212 families, my father always said. He knew every name, most of the children's names, and which team leader was in trouble. My job was much more relaxed. I managed contracts, assessed risks, organized files by year, and was generally the most enjoyable person at any meeting. My father always joked that I read warranty cards for fun. He wasn't entirely wrong. But that's what happens when you're careful. Everyone loves you when you have a problem with the supplier's paperwork. Your problem is that they don't like you sitting at their dinner table. My first meeting with Whitmore was an honor. I want you to remember that. I met Grant Whitmore in 2016 at a charity event his mother was hosting for a hospital. He was 38 then, and I was 28. He was the kind of handsome man who apologizes to himself, which is the most effective kind of apology. Remember to order coffee after the meeting. Ask questions and listen to the answers. That fall, when he drove me to Whitmore's house, I realized he was being treated as if he were presenting a business plan. The house was beautiful from the outside. As I approached, my work habits began to surface, and I noticed that the window frames were soft and moldy under the fresh white paint. Ancient wealth without money. I didn't know the expression then, but I felt it. Susan Whitmore greeted me at the door at 4 in the afternoon, wearing a pearl necklace. She was charming in a way that made you feel pampered. And she knew the first and last name of every influential man in the country, as well as the universities of their wives and children. She asked me what I was doing for dinner, and I told her I was managing contracts and compliance for my father's mechanical contracting company. Susan put down her fork, smiled at me as if she hadn't known I'd been tested, and said, "My job. That's what this family needs." Everyone laughed loudly, and I laughed too because it sounded like a compliment. It took me 9 years to realize it was a job opportunity. I didn't just get the job, I got it. Grant proposed the following spring at a restaurant his mother had chosen. I said yes wholeheartedly, and if I could change one thing, it would be the only thing I'd change. We married in 2017. 200 guests attended the wedding, most of whom I had never met before. At the reception, Susan stood holding a glass of champagne and gave a speech. Family takes care of its members. The guests applauded. My father wiped away his tears. I shook Grant's hand and felt like the happiest woman in Franklin County. 6 weeks later, Susan called me directly about Robbie, Grant's cousin, not my father, who had been at the reception and was a master of math. There was a vacancy at the acquiring company. I submitted my resume along with recommendations from my family and a cover letter requesting full details. And I felt I was qualified for the job. Robbie did very well in the interview and got the job. I personally signed the welcome package, as the merger documents had gone through the necessary due diligence process, and I remember how wonderful it was when two families collaborated in this way. I still think about that autograph, not with guilt, but with the thought of people opening a door and saying, "Welcome, I'm so glad you're here." Robbie was polite, punctual, and didn't do anything out of the ordinary, which I later learned is exactly what a first-time visitor should do. A first visit is a test. No one was going to transfer the correct pregnancy to the test tube. That Christmas, Susan gave my father a bottle of whiskey bigger than mine, telling him that Calloway Mechanical was a part of American history her family was proud to share. My father was ecstatic, and so was I. I think the whiskey ended up costing her about no 11 zallows more than the sentence would have cost. I personally signed the welcome package. I'm still thinking about it. Between 2019 and 2021, Calloway Mechanical experienced rapid growth. 3 expansions, 2 new contracts with municipalities, and a massive hiring effort to keep up with that growth. Amidst this growth, I noticed a pattern I had previously foreseen in how smoothly things would run in their beloved home. Susanna's daughter, an appointment organizer and accountant, plays tennis with her mother on Tuesdays and is a critic who mentored her online. Although Grant's network, as far as I know, consists entirely of people introduced to him by his mother. Every experience, however brief, was real. All the interviews were fantastic. All the positions were filled by the new HR manager, Marcy Holt, who joined us on Susan's enthusiastic recommendation, since the previous HR manager had suddenly retired with a generous benefits package that no one remembered to approve. I brought this up in a management meeting once. I told him that recommendations were becoming increasingly important, and that we might need a stricter policy on conflicts of interest. Marcy giggled softly, like a child giggling in fear of the dark. Fiona said she reads warranty cards for fun, and everyone laughed even louder, because that was my trademark. And my trademark made it easy for me to ignore it. My father patted me on the shoulder as we left. I want to make this clear. I didn't just ignore it and let it go. I wrote a note. I updated my conflict of interest statement form. I asked every new employee to sign them. I felt like I was accomplishing something worthwhile. And somehow, years later, it did. Those signed forms are valuable. But the form is like a seatbelt. It doesn't prevent the next manager from giving you instructions. By the summer of 2021, I had counted 11 employees with Whitmore fingerprints. I was close to figuring out how to get to 27. In September 2021, my father suffered a heart attack at his workplace. He was 60 years old at the time and became trapped between 2 rows of pipes. A 23-year-old trainee performed CPR until the ambulance arrived. He underwent triple coronary artery bypass surgery. He survived. I want to tell you right away that he survived, but he had been out of the building for 8 months, and the building staff had noticed his absence. That fall, I was driving between Columbus Hospital and my office in Grove City when I made a decision I still stand by. I chose my father's heartbeat over the organizational structure. As I was making that decision, Dean Whitmore, Grant's younger brother, 34, a man I hadn't previously assigned a job title to, volunteered to help temporarily. His name became DISC, temporarily. Then DISC became the job title for the operations manager. 2 years ago, Susan mentioned it at a dinner I wasn't attending and began introducing Grant Dean, who had joined the company as Vice President of Customer Relations, to the Municipal Relations Department. The meeting I'd been waiting for took place while Susan was in the living room, holding her mother's hand. 16 more people joined during those 8 months. Marcy operated on them all. When my father finally returned, weak, lethargic, traumatized, and looking like he'd had surgery, he looked at the new organ diagram and said it was nice to see all this renewed energy. I looked at the same diagram and saw the transplanted organ his body had rejected. I spoke to him in a low voice in his office. The door closed. He raised his hand warily. It was the first time I heard the ruling that would determine my fate for the next 5 years. "You will not expel your family members," my father said. Not angrily, but with a confident tone, soothing me, and a sincere handshake. I had no proof yet, and I want to be honest about that. All I had was an idea and a sketch. One night in late 2023 I couldn't sleep, so I sat at the kitchen table and sketched the company in a notebook. Every credit line, every reference, every reporting relationship I had with the company since my marriage. Then I took out a red pen and reviewed everyone related to the waiter's family, whether by blood, marriage, or through tennis. When I finished, I couldn't believe the number, so I circled twice. 27 people working in purchasing, accounts payable, estimating, human resources, and operations. That's not a random distribution if you know how money moves out of a company. It's a supply chain. The next morning, I took a legal note to my father. He stared at it for a long minute, and I saw something in his face. He's not a fool, Dad. He's honest, and that's another one of his weaknesses. Then he put the notebook back on the table. They're good people. The people of Fairy Susan's village are good people. He won't kick the family out. He meant it as a teacher. Susan had spent 6 years serving as my password. I took my notebook, returned to the office, and only did what I could sign without her. I tightened approval requirements, mandated double approval for new suppliers, and flagged every purchase record in the system. I felt like I was trying to weather a storm that others saw as light. 2 months later, I received purchase order number 7734, and I couldn't have felt more at ease. It was January 2024, and I was doing the simplest job in the world, matching quarterly budgets to commodity price indices. The price of copper had fallen that quarter, but its costs hadn't. I checked the figures 3 times, and then I found 2 years' worth of invoices from the pipe and fittings supplier, Brightline Supply LLC. We paid an average of 22% above the market price. 22% is no small amount, 22% in the second-tier mortgage category every year. Now, a low price isn't a crime in itself. Sometimes it's due to a lazy buyer. Sometimes it's due to an old relationship that no one buys from anymore. So, I did what people usually do. I called the seller. Brightline Supply was 5 years old. In 2021, my father's name was added to Dean Whitmore's list of approved suppliers during an 8-month recovery period. The company is based in an office complex in Westerville, a building that resembles a small studio apartment, and is run by a company suspected of being a sanitary ware dealer. The real estate agent's name is Ted London, someone I don't know, and his website is 3 pages long, one of which, I bet you don't see it, shows a warehouse in the corner with a forklift company watermark. I sat with everyone for a long, cautious evening. I didn't call anyone. I didn't go to any of their offices. I was that girl who cried uncontrollably in leadership meetings, and I saw how a room full of grown men could turn a woman's enthusiasm into a mere slogan. Now, I count every stone before I utter the word wall. I started printing receipts 5 years ago. And for 3 weeks, the dining table wasn't used as a dining table. I sorted the bills by quarter, stuck index cards on the wall, and ate standing up at the table like a raccoon in a smart jacket. Grant traveled a lot that summer. The work had to be customer service, so I was mostly the one doing it. That pale, disgusting bastard. Here's what the paper said. Brightline's prices had increased in small, polite increments, not enough for a check, and always required a second signature. The limit I set for myself was that someone would study my fences and build the gate exactly 1 inch below the top beam. Some purchase orders were repeated every few months for the same dimensions and the same items, and very quickly. There were also some retail orders, the largest of which were for materials that couldn't be matched by any order number. Brass tools from fictitious projects. I checked the receipts with them. The records were signed, stamped, and complete, and I began to suspect they were fake. You know that feeling when a word you've read 100 times suddenly sounds misspelled. Those were my company documents. Documents I'd trusted for years that were starting to look like pieces of furniture in a typical house. In January of that year, I set myself a rule: investigate, don't assume. For every unusual object, I wrote an explanation of the object's innocence beside it. I kept only those that required more imagination than innocence. By February, I had a pile. The question wasn't whether the money was flowing, but who was holding the bucket. I was determined to get an answer. I asked Grant about Brightline on Tuesday night at a dinner I'd arranged to make it more of a story about our marriage than an interrogation. I kept it simple. Hello, stranger. Do you have any information about Brightline products? Their prices have dropped, and I haven't found much information about the company. The Grant branch paused for a moment. If you can't see the one you love, even for a moment, I wouldn't recommend it, he said. Then he smiled his usual smile and said, My mother knows the owner. Right, Faye? They're good people. My mother knows the owner, right? Which owner? She asked. Ted Lund, he replied, because he's short on deliveries, and we pay him a huge amount of money a year. Grant put down his fork and looked at him with a look I'd never seen before. It wasn't a look of guilt, but a look of patience. The patience of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and practicing for it. He said calmly, Do it yourself. Get the spreadsheet and write a story. My father's company is ready. Everything is ready. Can we have a friendly dinner? We didn't argue. This is a room where no one believes anything. No one raised their voice. No one got up from the table. We talked about our nieces and the vacation we hadn't been planning on taking. And we loaded the dishwasher side by side like a working couple. But then, for 2 seconds, something happened. We knew it. You know, a bone breaks before an X-ray. He knew Brightline. He always had. When given the choice between telling the truth and managing me, he chose his mother tongue management. In March 2024, I went to my father with a 1-page summary and a price comparison easy enough for even a 5th grader to understand. Just 2 columns. How much did copper cost the world? How much did copper cost us? I read it twice. And for a wonderful moment, I saw my real father appear before me. The man who once kicked a salesman out of a parking lot because he paid for a gas station. Then he pursed his lips and said he would think about it silently. And I made the mistake of thinking that the sentence referred to the literal meaning of the word. Here's what happened instead, and I still remember the exact time because it still amazes me. I left the office at 11:40 a.m. Then, at 16:15 p.m., Susan Whitmore suddenly arrived at my parents' house with lasagna. For the first time in 4 months, my meeting at Marcy Hall and my parents' calendar were the only 2 places where the meeting was held. You're studying math. Me too at dinner. My mom told me that later and apologized all the time. Susan wiped away her tears and said how hard she worked, how much she pushed herself. Fiona was very concerned about her ability to see ghosts in numbers. She never spoke about the clear dividing line. She shouldn't have. She didn't discard my evidence, she reframed it. From professional to anxious girl, from accountant to overworked woman. It was a wise move. Honestly, you can't argue with him directly, because contradicting him only validates him. My father patted my hand at the end of the week and said, Maybe I should take a break. No silent investigation was conducted into the matter. That Monday, for the first time in 9 years at my family business, I was called by HR to a meeting with no agenda. 3 employees complained about me. The word Marcy used was pattern. She must have learned it from me. A pattern of hostile, accusatory behavior that creates a difficult work environment. All 3 complaints were on my list of 27 legal documents. One was from someone I had spoken to twice about the parking situation. Marcy had placed a note on the table expressing her sympathy for the woman who had killed her pet. In the passive voice, common in all corporate attacks, I was offered the opportunity to work remotely for a period of time on behalf of all the people whose complaints were under review. I want you to understand the details of this. It turns out my immune system, which had been warning me for years, had become infected. Technically, my card was still valid. Technically, my name was still on the compliance policy, but I was out of the building. Dean approved the surgery, and Marcy took over the investigation. My father, the father who was with me, was tired, and he told me over the phone that there might be a chance to recover a little when things calmed down. He wasn't a coward. I want you to understand that he was a 62-year-old man with a healthy heart, a company he loved, and 2 narratives of reality that he nourished every day, one of which comes with lasagna and doesn't ask anyone to fight. I was alone in my car in the parking lot, so I allowed myself a moment of unprofessionalism. I then went to the office supply store and bought 6 plastic filing boxes because I needed a copy of everything I had disabled in the system. However, I had to stop first. 12th floor, purchase order number 7734. Copper equipment worth $84,000 purchased from Brightline was moved from our 12th floor warehouse last Thursday before I started working remotely. I had some free time that afternoon. I left it in the building and spent my time pacing back and forth on the kitchen floor, like a woman counting her cash, robbing her own bank. Location 12 was at the back. Behind the supports and rolls of duct tape, a metal shelf stood as tall as a house. According to the documents, there was $84,000 on the 3rd shelf. I stood before it for a long time. The shelf was empty. It hadn't been empty recently. Empty. Dust had settled on a smooth, untouched gray layer, taking a long time to settle. No sign of drag, no clean rectangle where the wooden pallets had been. No fork marks on the concrete beneath. Whatever that piece of wood was, even though it arrived, was disassembled and placed on this shelf. I wouldn't touch that metal. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. The board is wide, clearly visible up close. The number of sections is printed on the frame, and the dates are on each frame. The shelf is empty, gray, and serene, more expensive than my own home. It's amazing how the seasons change, unlike electronic calendars. This document is debatable. Susan taught me this back in March, but I refused to accept anyone because of the dust. Standing under the cold corridor light, I finally realized I wasn't paranoid. I never was, and things just get worse before they get better. I emailed the photos to my personal email, sent my lawyer's credit card code, walked through the security room, and smiled at everyone. Remember that shelf. We'll meet again. I gave my husband the last door and held it open with both hands to make sure I would hold on to it. It was a Sunday in early March 2025, almost a year after the lasagna. I placed the Bay 12 pictures next to the bold, striped collection on our kitchen table and said, "Stay by my side. We take this for my father, for me, and for you, for everything your family has accomplished, and you're still away from it." Grant stared at the photos for a long time. Then my husband, the man who remembered ordering coffee in 2016, said, "You're asking me to compete with my mother. Family pays the bill." Here it is. The word Susan came out of her daughter's mouth after 9 years. I finally understood its meaning. It wasn't a promise of shelter, but a declaration of ownership, a familial definition documented with love. I was wrong too. So, while Grant didn't fully understand, he grasped the core of the problem. I listened to both of us and responded with surprising firmness. "If you've been with me this long, you know it's not cold. I'm the one waiting." "Fine, that's it," I said. That same Thursday, March 13, 2025, I filed for divorce in Franklin County Court. The clerk who took my papers had a kind look and wished me a happy weekend despite the cold weather. Losing my first husband was the end of my marriage. It's been a year since he passed away. And now, here's my first case. All I knew was that standing at that desk was the beginning of an hour whose end I couldn't foresee for my marriage. My divorce lawyer's name is Naomi Price. She's 44 years old. She identifies herself as a surgeon and speaks like one. The first thing she did was confiscate my only weapon. From that moment until the final order, she said, "Don't touch anything that belongs to that company. No resignations, no canceled supplier contracts, no forged memos, no erotic meetings, nothing." I actually laughed. I had an empty shelf with $84,000 and a closet full of files in my locker. I was stuffed. She didn't laugh again. "Fiona, listen to the jury's instructions. Grant's lawyers claim that the increase in the value of that company during your marriage is jointly owned. Your name is on their compliance records. Once you start cutting off family members and canceling contracts with suppliers, you won't be considered a perjurer. You are a spiteful woman, destroying wealth to diminish the value of your possessions. Then everything you say will be believed. They will hide your evidence behind your intentions." I sat there hating it. The hatred you harbor for people is justified. Everything I do will be believed, and none of them will be trusted. The plan wasn't protected solely by my father's loyalty. It was protected by its very nature. They either saved the company he was trying to rescue or they lost it. So here's my benchmark for anyone labeled a madman: protection. Sometimes the strongest move on the board seems like simply pausing. So, What am I allowed to do? I asked. Naomi smiled for the first time that day, and I understood then why people were so afraid. Be prepared, she said calmly, legally, and completely. It will be over when the time is right. The Whites had dragged on the divorce for 15 months, and at first, I thought it was just regret, 2 consecutive installments, a new lawyer on the way, and a rescheduled timeline. The settlement sessions felt like negotiating over furniture, like we were getting a divorce on the couch. Okay, I thought. Take your time, I've taken mine. I hired a forensic accountant from Cincinnati named Priya and paid her $35,000 of my savings. A down payment on a house I no longer needed, which could be funny or a tax headache, depending on your mood. On nights and weekends, Cal Dobbs, my father's accountant of 22 years, the first person I trusted within the company, showed me accounting information he was fully authorized to share, but was afraid to do so privately. Nevertheless, we reconstructed Brightline's records for 5 years, every receipt, every mail order, every invoice signed in the same small, bold print. Priya's spreadsheet had grown from 1 tab to 9, then to a numbered summary sheet at the top. She even went silent during our calls. As I scrolled through my contract files, which were open, I reread Brightline's master supply agreement and found the clause that would completely fix my schedule. It stated that the 5-year automatic renewal would automatically renew unless cancelled in writing at least 30 days before its expiry. I checked the expiration date, then checked it again, then sat motionless at the dinner table as the cards on the wall formed a countdown. Cancellation had to be completed before the end of June 2026, or the company would remain bound to the Brightline contract until 2031. It was an incredibly expensive contract for another 5 years, tied to my management position. The divorce, that never-ending divorce, was finalized in mid-June. When I saw the renewal date, the past 15 months seemed completely different, like a mirror image. I compared my divorce date to the contract timeline. The first postponement request was submitted a week after Naomi gave us the initial information, a week after they told us what I already knew. The change of lawyer, which delayed the disclosure of evidence, pushed us past the window in which I could have sought an early settlement. Every delay brought the deadline closer to a specific date in late June and beyond, until the calculations became very precise. It takes approximately 48 hours from the legal deadline to dissolve Brightline. 48 hours. They didn't delay the divorce out of hatred, greed, or even financial planning. The contract had simply expired. Under pressure, I couldn't cancel anything while the case was open. They were betting that if the case was closed 2 days earlier, a newly divorced woman wouldn't get divorced again within 48 hours, and it wouldn't spark a corporate war. Honestly, of course, it works for almost everyone. I called Naomi and told her about the article, and there was a heavy silence on the line. So we never fail, she said. Fiona, they expect you to be tired. I looked at the picture of the shelf, mounted like a cornerstone in the center, on my wall of cards. I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Not fear, but a sense of commitment to a schedule. They thought they were wasting my time. They didn't realize I was comparing my time to theirs. Priya's final report arrived in April 2026, 81 pages long, presented in a circular format, telling me in accountant jargon what I had been asking her to tell me in women's jargon for 2 years. Brightline Supply LLC's total overpayments and fraudulent purchases over the past 5 years amounted to $1.9 million. I read the $1.9 million figure standing up, then sat down and read it again. The report traces the short path of the funds, from Calloway Mechanical to Brightline, and from Brightline to the service management company. The service management company's registered agent name was the same one I had first seen on a suspicious website 2 years prior. Ted Lundy's corporate information supplement did something I would never have done from my kitchen. Theodore Lundy of Shaker Heights, a cousin of Susan Whitmore, was listed as one of his favorite cousins in his mother's 1989 obituary. His mother-in-law knew good people. I want to express my feelings, and it wasn't a victory. Have you ever discovered the source of a strange smell in your house? Honestly, it was like finding something real inside a real wall. You feel relieved, but also uneasy, because now you have to open the wall. My husband's family used to smoke pipes at my parents' house for 5 years, And they would send us Christmas cards and flyers in tiny, narrow print, the kind shoppers swear by ghosts on empty shelves. Priya wrote to the operations manager. Dean Whitmore, a volunteer. I closed the report, smoothed the edges on the table, just like I do when I need a handshake, and wrote a sentence on the cover in pencil. No one will see it until the order is given. 39 days left. Let me pause here and ask you a question, as a friend to a friend. If you've ever warned your family about someone and seen them trust the nice stranger instead of you, please tell them in the comments. I've read all of them. And if you want to know exactly what I sacrificed to escape my clutches, stay tuned because it's coming. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the finale. In May, 5 weeks before the trial, Susan took a big step, and I admit it was a very successful one. He arrived dressed in a peaceful manner. Susan, Grint's lawyer, suggested family mediation instead of legal proceedings, emphasizing emotional and conciliatory approaches, and calmly acknowledged that this was the best solution. Withers raised the issue of revaluing Calloway's mechanical property as marital assets. Just like with the weather, there's a question mark hanging over my father's company if I sign a comprehensive confidentiality agreement, covering both family and business matters. Read it again. Why don't you agree? They'll stop demanding a share of my father's company in exchange for my silence. Naomi called things by their names. You know what you've got. After 15 months of searching and investigating, and despite our caution, a lead emerged. It was almost obvious. A request for testimony. Grint's lawyer objected with utter haste. They knew. And instead of being afraid, they set a price. What I saw at last was Susan's world. Everything was negotiable, including the truth. Especially the truth. Every scandal has a solution. Every crime is just a bill yet to be sent. I was sure I'd receive it too. Quiet little Fiona, who looked forward to every meal, signed the welcome packages and swallowed her toast. Of course, she turned the bitter truth into a clean exit. This woman has been doing this her whole life. I asked Naomi to politely decline without replying. Her response made me laugh out loud in the empty apartment. I said, no, they just understand you. Wait until they talk more. Talk more. I heard from my mother that Susan was having some kind of crisis in their social circle, and that she had tried to set both families on fire while I was away. The neighborhood restaurant system operated on its own weather forecast, and for me, the forecast was disastrous, predicting heavy rain. Then I broke my rule. Halfway through, the snow connected me to the community. Nothing connected me to my parents' kitchen table. On Memorial Day weekend in 2026, as my mother carried a pot of soup to church, I placed Brian's report in front of my father, and he didn't say a word as he read it. He read for 40 minutes. My father is not a writer. He moves his lips slightly when he reads a law book. It's a habit I've had all my life. His lips stopped moving at the Q extension. His hands remained still on his cheeks and his shoulders trembled. I saw a man who had been scrutinizing a handshake for 5 years while performing an autopsy. When he finally raised his head, his eyes filled with tears. What he said broke my heart more than anything Susan had ever said. A family is not to be trifled with, but this time it came out differently, less clearly. It was no longer a law. It had become a question. The voice of a man asking whether the punishment upon which he had built his honor had been used as bait against him. No, Dad, she didn't. I said, stepping across the table. But someone has redefined our family, and you must be losing hope about what will happen next. Then he was silent for a long time. What do you want from me, Faye? I had been waiting for this question my whole life. A phone call. 3 weeks later, I said, I want to tell you about the night before the peace conference, because it was the night the real war was decided, and I was alone in the room. Everything was ready, Bria's reserve report, the letter canceling the draft. While my father was on duty as a cavalry officer, and I was sipping iced tea in my apartment, I found myself designing the silent version. You know the silent version. Give Dad the report. Let him terminate the employment of 27 people with a severance package and a handshake. Let things fade away gradually in quiet negotiations. No press, no police, no chaos at any table. A version where Fiona fixes everything, and no one knows she was right. I've always planned quiet versions my whole life. The quiet versions make girls feel responsible, instead of being the center of attention. We absorb the family's toxins and call it strength. We sign welcome packages. We hold on to the room like we're a child given to us at birth and told never to let go. And when I looked at my iced tea, I finally understood. 15 years of silence gave the Whitmore family time, protection, and $1.9 million. My silence didn't stop my family, it stopped the plan. These are words I repeated aloud to myself at 100 a.m. And I stopped seeing it as a burden, because I felt like I was giving up something I had clung to for so long. It had simply become my stance. If I could uncover the truth, it would remain undeniable. But the price would be high, and I would be the victim. My name, my personal life, and my precious reputation. I texted Naomi at 1:14 a.m. I had moved on from the whole thing. I'd run out of patience. She replied immediately at 6 a.m. It was time. This is what I changed. And I want you to hear the real numbers. Because this is what makes people think I'm crazy. The bulk of the marital assets was our house in Upper Arlington. The house sold for $640,000 at the time of the trial. My share should be about $320,000. There's a pension distribution, a question mark over spousal support, and Grant's lawyers are still making a fuss about the company's growth during the marriage. At the final settlement hearing in early June, Naomi prepared a package that included $40,000 for me, another $40,000 in living expenses, and the full distribution of my pension. In return, each member of the Whitmore family, under a carefully worded clause drafted by Naomi, would waive all claims, rights, and demands related to value to and from Callaway Mechanical, its properties, and assets, including Grant, Susan, Dean Ted Lund, Brightline, myself, and any person or entity I know or am aware of. Unknown. He read it beside them. You could see the calculations accelerating like the weather in the room. They're paying us to get out. Nearly $250,000 in cash transfers from her exhausted, unstable, and bankrupt ex-husband. They had to get the notary to finalize the paperwork very quickly. Naomi gave me one last look before I could say my first word. You're paying the price for leaving your dad's team. Do you understand? I said every dollar and signed the document. That was the final door closing. The old life, the mortgage payment, the stability, the chance to pretend for a while that nothing had happened. Written in blue ink, in my own handwriting, people think the point of no return is something that happens to you. Sometimes you believe it. June 16, 2026. The final hearing lasted 11 minutes, an insult to the end of 9 years, but I was beginning to appreciate its value. At 9:31 a.m., the judge signed the order. My marriage was over. The releases were available for live streaming, and the stagnation that had characterized Naomi's 15-month run melted away like sugar. Grant didn't see me in the hall. Susan wasn't there. She regarded the chorus as if it were a profanity, a luxury considering the scale of the edifice it represented in her life. I climbed the court steps in the usual June sunshine, stood beside a bronze statue of someone else, and glanced at the clock I had just adjusted. Honestly, I'm not okay. My calendar was hanging on the wall, so there were 47.5 hours left until the cancellation deadline at Brightline. You'd think I'd go home and get some rest. But instead, it was 9:40 a.m., 9 minutes late. I called my dad, who'd been on the phone since 7 a.m., because I'd told him the appointment was today. Dad, it's over. It's time. Fire all 27 employees. The file is with the horse. The papers are with the employment lawyer. Security has been notified. Mars will be fired first, before she even touches a keyboard. Wait a minute. For 34 years I've heard about your family members being fired for being unfit for the job. My father said, I've already put my shoes on. He was 64, but he looked 20. He stood on the courthouse steps in a gray suit, recently divorced, broke, holding a phone in one hand and 47 watches in the other, and I laughed. You waited 15 months to hear how the call went. Me too. What I didn't expect was who would be standing outside my house at dinner time. I wasn't in the building when the layoffs happened. Naomi's last piece of advice, a valuable one: leave the decision to the owner, but have the board carry it out. It's perfectly clean. But Cal called me that night and told me, and I'm going to tell you what he told me, because Cal Dobbs waited 22 years to feel happy at 1100 a.m. My father, the employment lawyer, sits with his notebook in a small meeting room. 27 meetings, each lasting 10 minutes. Documents and files, recorded, legal, deliberately boring, no noise, no lobbying, no undisclosed conflicts of interest, no dealings with related parties that violate signed policies. This procedure ends today. This is the termination agreement. This is the door. Marcy Holt's badge went first before she opened another file. According to Cal, she barely said a word, which made us tremble a little too much in one scene. Experts don't argue, they consult someone. Dean Whitmore argued. Dean questioned my father's loyalty. Then he expressed his gratitude. Afterward, as he regained his height, he slowly wrote down the initials he'd written on the admission slips as proof of his hard work. All while his employment lawyer, Dean, watched. On his way out, Dean kicked the trash can. I want you to appreciate that the trash can is the one part of the room my father still remembers. I was as satisfied as a kid caught explaining the wrong ball. At 4:00 p.m. it was all over. 27 counters. The security guards collected the cards like a hotel cashier. Grant never got in. At 4:20 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from that year. You could have done that quietly. I read it twice, turned off my phone, and said to my empty kitchen, yeah, that's the problem. I was still there when the knocking began. It was loud, incomprehensible, and urgent. And it wasn't from the police but from the family. Susan Whitmore had never visited my flat before. She had to accept it before it happened, and accepting it meant accepting the divorce. The full details of her marriage had been revealed during the 14 months I was away from the High Council in Arlington. But my address was on the court papers, and here she was, right in front of me at 7 p.m, wearing pearls and a fur coat, knocking on my door. I opened it, because you never see a sight like that twice in your life. 27 people, Fiona. She barged in without knocking, her voice filling the apartment. Ungrateful, anxious, spiteful, 27 pure people, family, relationships, Christmas. She said Christmas was in June. What would people say? I wish I had thought for a moment before dragging my father's name into this mess. I stood by the bookshelf and let it fall on me, and that was a strange victory. 2 years ago, that sound reset my nervous system, and now it's back through the window. And this is the room I haven't seen in 30 years. She scanned the room, rearranged it, and changed the musical instruments. The sound faded. The beard melted away. Suddenly, she sat on my sofa, adjusted her coat, and warmed herself in one swift motion. Fiona, my dear, we are all weary. Let me offer you something sensible. And here it is, the same as the evening gown. Give us back true purity. 15. Her words a sweet, disguised prelude. 12. By paying the price of guilt. Sign a mutually agreed upon secret pact. Nothing given, nothing made public. Your father will maintain his good reputation, and you will maintain yours. No one needs to know. You're brilliant at handling things, my dear. That's your best quality. That's what you inherited. A man who always responded to my desires, who saw my essence and how I could use it, has repaid me. The quiet exit, or rather the quiet version, was wrapped up as a gift. It had been a year since then. I stared at it for a long time, then finally asked it the question I had been putting off since the day I found out about it. Susan, who signed the welcome package. She was completely silent, and for just a second I saw Susan Whitmore, doing nothing. Finally, she said, my mother owned a flower shop, and there was a rough note in her voice I'd never heard before. On Lee Street, Lones's flower shop. It was my father-in-law's fault when she married Wyatt. She chose her words very carefully. The shop was a safe haven. No one had asked for my mother. I'd found it on Thanksgiving Day. Nevertheless, she set the table. Susan straightened her coat, and the stone disappeared underground. Little Fiona, I've learned that in these families, a woman is either useful or a piece of furniture. I've been useful for 40 years. I made sure my son married a useful woman. It's not cruelty, it's just how things are in this world. Family takes care of family. She was there last time. Toast, the password, the whole universe. Love is a supply chain. Marriage is a purchase. Her mother's flower shop was built and financed over 4 decades from my father's warehouse. Susan was the university, and at one point, the keeper. To be honest with you, I wasn't terribly sorry. I just wanted to tell you the truth. It was there and it was true. If he'd stopped talking then, things would have been different. She didn't stop. She got up, grabbed her coat, and handed over the exit plan she'd prepared in the car. Sign the agreement, my dear, because if you do, Calloway's name will be the last word on every table from here to Cleveland. And may God bless us all through this ordeal. Think about what you'll choose. Then she let herself relax quietly. A woman confident that her calculations would work in her favor. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I took out my phone and checked the 8:00 a.m. meeting for the next day, because you never know. 38 hours left. The meeting room on the second floor of Callaway Mechanical Engineering seats 12 and is never used. 8:00 a.m. on June 17th. There were 2 representatives from our sponsoring company, 3 executives from the Harrow Group, a healthcare construction company that accounts for 30% of our revenue, and me and my father Cal. Naomi helped me with my choices one last time last night, and I want you to see the intersections exactly as I did. Since this meeting wasn't mandatory, we didn't need any rules. We could quietly dissolve Brightline by registered mail, treat the layoffs as a personal restructuring, and let things unfold discreetly. Susanna's story, without Susanna, was really my story. My story held all the secrets I discovered. Instead, I stood before 2 audiences with the most powerful influence, the company that connects our projects and the client that delivers them. I turned on the projector. The first slide showed an empty metal shelf, faded gray, with a section number written on a vertical plate. I said, "This shelf is a copper plate worth $84,000. It was never here." I took this picture 2 years ago, and today I can finally tell you why I had to wait. I did my best. Complete calm, like weather forecast. A clear line, 1.9 million, 27 laid off people, initials recorded, references to the fraud lawyer my father signed at 7:15 that morning. Then I received the cancellation letter, and 24 hours before the automatic renewal, I signed it on the table and mailed it to Cal via registered mail. I was asked for an acknowledgement of receipt. Hargrove executives asked tough questions for an hour. Representatives from the sponsoring company also asked tough questions. Finally, just as Naomi had predicted, Hargrove's senior vice president closed the file and announced the decision that cost us dearly. We've temporarily halted the Meridian expansion while we review it. 90 days, $1 million in revenue, because I'd rather expose this scam publicly in class than whisper it in the hallway. My father backed down, but I didn't, and it didn't hurt me. Because I paid that bill once, at 1 in the morning. I knew about iced tea and the exchange rate. The news spread through our neighborhood, and Susan's prophecy came true within a week. The newspaper described it as a grotesque and widespread definition of a family business. My name was there from the start. There was a hint of revenge between every line. I helped to correct that part. I praised the wrong thing. You're right, Susan. I didn't tell anyone when I folded the paper. Family takes care of its members. That's what I do. Here's the bill for 90 days, and then the bill for 5 days. Harrow is back. Their auditors spent 6 weeks reviewing our records and found exactly what we expected. But they also found something we hadn't anticipated. The senior vice president told my father about it over coffee in the same conference room. The contractor didn't reopen the wound for 30 years, and that was the only reason he stayed. The insurance company renewed the contract on terms we were happy with. And, as is often the case, the fraud case was closed. No restrictions, no punishment. Ted Lynn's lawyers negotiated a civil settlement. 1 million applications were rejected in 4 years. Helder Lane's case was dismissed, and the file remains open in a drawer where everyone can hear. 2 out of 27 cases were unjustly dismissed. Both cases were closed based on signed conflict of interest forms that I had everyone fill out, while Marcy mocked me in management meetings. Warranty cards are read for amusement. The company now employs 189 people. According to its purchasing policy, the weakest survive the siege. The white lights are still on. This is the part no one warns you about. There's no lightning. Susan is still the head of Gala Hospital, and the club still loves her. Tonight she remembers the names of the tough boys in that neighborhood, and she's very talented. Grant remarried on Thanksgiving Day, this time to the woman his mother had introduced him to. I hope things are better for him than the leaflet suggests. Their world kept turning, no longer revolving around us. And it turned out that was all that mattered, not their downfall. Our door was locked, and I, instead of bearing a welcome gift, held the key. In November, 5 months after we met, my father asked me to accompany him on a tour of the warehouse, which, as always, was his language of love. He stood on the 12th floor, on the 3rd shelf. The warehouse was filled with genuine, working brass parts, crafted by a Californian dealer who had authenticated his products in 3 ways. My father stood there, looking out the window like men looking out of church windows. Finally, he said, I fired the family. I had to listen to the family. That was my only excuse. If you knew Raymond Calloway, you'd know he was a great man. Then he gave me the chairmanship. He stood there as chairman, putting on his shoes in the store and displaying his organic products. I agreed on one condition, and I made him tremble in the hallway. From now on, all meetings will be held in groups of 3, no exceptions. No matter the last name, especially Calloway. He laughed. Then he saw my face and shook my hand, as if he were signing something. At the company outing that fall, I wore my new badge for the first time. President Fiona Calloway, the daughter of a welder, stands by the shelf she finally trusts. I was born alone, no one raised me, and I've finally stopped apologizing for reading good literature. She says, if there's one thing I'd engrave on every family's door, it's this: keeping peace doesn't mean keeping family. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop being silent. The empty shelf in room 12, the welcome packet I signed myself, 9 minutes after the judge's seal. That's my story. Now tell me yours. What line would you have drawn earlier? Write it in the comments. I'll read them all. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to Stories of Silent Drama, because next week's story will be more detailed. Take care of yourself. There's a family there too.